Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. David Morrison had always been a man of simple pleasures. For 15 years, he'd lived quietly in their modest suburban home, working as what his wife Jennifer believed was a mid-level IT consultant. Every morning, he kissed her goodbye, drove his unremarkable Honda Civic to what she assumed was another day of troubleshooting corporate networks. Every evening, he returned home with the same tired smile, asking about her day at the local marketing firm where she worked as a creative director. Jennifer Morrison was everything David had once thought he wanted: blonde, ambitious, and charming enough to light up any room she entered. When they'd met at a coffee shop 12 years ago, she was struggling to establish her career, and he was immediately drawn to her determination. She saw in him stability, reliability, a safe harbor after a string of disappointing relationships with unreliable men. What Jennifer never knew was that David's morning commute didn't end at any corporate office. Instead, he drove to a private airstrip where a jet waited to take him to meetings that would make her head spin. David Morrison wasn't just another IT consultant. He was David Morrison, the ghost investor whose anonymous hedge fund had quietly accumulated positions in dozens of Fortune 500 companies. His real worth wasn't the $80,000 salary Jennifer believed he earned. It was closer to $3.2 billion, carefully hidden behind layers of shell companies and offshore accounts. He'd chosen this life deliberately. After growing up watching his father's wealth tear his family apart, the affairs, the gold diggers, the constant suspicion, David had decided early that when he found love, it would be real. Not transactional, not based on what he could provide, but who he was as a person. For 12 years, the charade had worked perfectly. Jennifer seemed content with her middle-class lifestyle. She didn't ask for designer bags or expensive vacations. She seemed to genuinely love him for the quiet, dependable man he pretended to be. But lately, something had shifted. Jennifer had been working late more often, her phone suddenly password protected, her laughter a little too bright when she talked about her new colleague, Ryan Hutchins. David noticed everything. It was a skill that had made him billions, but he said nothing. He watched, waited, and hoped he was wrong. Ryan Hutchins was everything David appeared not to be. 6'2", with the kind of confident swagger that came from a lifetime of getting what he wanted. Fresh out of business school at 32, he joined Jennifer's firm as a senior account executive, bringing with him stories of his family's real estate empire and promises of bigger things to come. His clothes were expensive, his car was a leased BMW, and his Instagram was filled with photos from exotic locations that someone making $90,000 a year shouldn't be able to afford. What Ryan lacked in actual substance, he made up for in presentation. He talked a big game about deals in the works, about family money, about opportunities just around the corner. To Jennifer, who had grown tired of clipping coupons and dreaming about vacations they couldn't afford, Ryan represented everything her marriage wasn't: excitement, possibility, the promise of a larger life. The first time Jennifer stayed late to work on a project with Ryan, David tracked her phone to a hotel across town. He could have confronted her then, could have saved them both months of deception. Instead, he did what he always did. He gathered information. Private investigators, financial records, phone taps, all completely illegal, all completely invisible to everyone involved. Within 2 weeks, David knew everything. The affair had been going on for 3 months. Ryan was drowning in debt despite his flashy exterior. His family's real estate empire was a series of failed strip mall investments, and his BMW was 2 payments away from repossession. Most telling of all, Jennifer wasn't just sleeping with Ryan. She was planning to leave David for him. The conversations David's investigators captured painted a clear picture. Jennifer saw David as a stepping stone she'd outgrown, and Ryan was her ticket to the life she felt she deserved. The betrayal cut deeper than David had expected. Not because he was surprised, he'd seen the signs for months, but because it confirmed his worst fears about human nature. Jennifer hadn't fallen out of love with him. She'd never truly loved him at all. She loved the security he provided, the stability, the safe choice. But when something that seemed bigger and better came along, she was ready to discard 15 years of marriage without a second thought. As David sat in his home office that night, listening to Jennifer humming in the shower after another late work session, he made a decision that would change everything. He wouldn't confront her. He wouldn't try to save their marriage. Instead, he would give her exactly what she wanted, a chance to take half of everything. She just had no idea what everything actually meant. Chapter 2. The Unraveling Truth. The next 3 weeks passed like a carefully choreographed dance. Jennifer grew bolder in her deception, sometimes not even bothering to create elaborate excuses for her absences. David played his part perfectly, the oblivious husband, occasionally asking gentle questions that Jennifer deflected with practiced ease. "You've been working so hard lately," he'd say over dinner. "This Ryan guy must be a real taskmaster." Jennifer would laugh, not catching the way David's eyes had gone completely cold. "Oh, you know how it is with new accounts. We're really pushing to land this big client. Ryan's just very driven." Driven. That was one word for it. Through his surveillance, David watched their relationship progress from stolen moments in hotel rooms to elaborate fantasies about their future together. Jennifer had even started apartment hunting, though she told David she was just browsing online for fun. The apartment she'd found wasn't modest. It was a downtown loft that would cost 3 times their current mortgage. When David's investigator dug deeper, he discovered Jennifer believed Ryan's promises about a promotion that would triple his salary and stock options that would make them wealthy within 5 years. None of it was true, of course. Ryan's family business was hemorrhaging money, and his position at Jennifer's firm was already under scrutiny due to his failure to bring in any substantial new clients. The man Jennifer was planning to leave her marriage for was living month to month, one disaster away from complete financial ruin. But David didn't enlighten her. Instead, he began making his own preparations. First, he restructured his holdings, moving assets through a complex web of trusts and international accounts. To anyone investigating, including the divorce lawyer Jennifer had secretly consulted, David Morrison would appear to own exactly what he'd always claimed: a modest 401k, half ownership in their house, and a small savings account. Second, he started documenting everything. Not just the affair, but Jennifer's spending habits, her debts, her increasingly cavalier attitude toward their marriage. She'd been using their joint credit card for dinners with Ryan, hotels, even lingerie purchases she certainly wasn't wearing for her husband. She was either incredibly careless or believed David was too trusting to notice. Third, he began setting up what would become the most elaborate financial trap of his career. David opened new accounts in Jennifer's name, set up credit lines she didn't know existed, and started building a paper trail that would make Jennifer appear far wealthier than she actually was. To any outside observer, it would look like Jennifer Morrison had been hiding assets from her husband for years. The breakthrough came during what David privately called the restaurant reconnaissance. Jennifer and Ryan had started meeting at La Bernardine, an upscale French restaurant downtown where entrees started at $60. Through carefully placed listening devices, David learned about their timeline. Jennifer planned to ask for a divorce after their anniversary in 2 weeks, and Ryan had promised her they'd be engaged within 6 months. What made David's blood run truly cold wasn't the timeline. It was Jennifer's casual cruelty when talking about him. 15 years, she'd said to Ryan over wine that cost more than David's supposed daily salary. 15 years of my life wasted on someone with no ambition, no vision. Do you know what it's like being married to someone who's perfectly content with mediocrity? You deserve so much more, Ryan had replied. When this promotion comes through, we'll have everything we've dreamed about. That house in the hills, trips to Europe, the life you should have had all along. I just feel like I've been asleep, Jennifer continued. Like I settled for the first safe option that came along instead of holding out for what I really wanted. David's not a bad person, but he's ordinary. And I'm tired of being ordinary. Ordinary. David had to fight the urge to laugh. The woman who couldn't balance a checkbook without his help, who needed GPS to navigate their own neighborhood, who thought a good investment was a designer purse on sale. She thought he was the ordinary one. That night, as Jennifer slept beside him after another late work session, David made his final preparations. He contacted Patricia Valdez, the most ruthless divorce attorney in the state, the same one Jennifer had consulted, though neither woman knew about the other's involvement. He also reached out to certain associates from his real professional life, people who specialized in making problems disappear in ways that left no fingerprints. The anniversary dinner would be in 1 week. Jennifer had insisted on Le Jardin, their most expensive restaurant in the city, claiming she wanted to celebrate properly. She'd even bought a new dress, black, sophisticated, the kind of outfit someone wore when they had important business to conduct. David knew exactly what kind of business she had in mind. He'd seen the divorce papers she'd hidden in her car, the custody arrangements, though they had no children, and the financial demands that would have been laughable if they weren't so revealing. Jennifer wasn't just planning to leave him. She was planning to destroy him financially, taking everything she could in the process. She had no idea that David Morrison, mild-mannered IT consultant, had spent the last 15 years of their marriage becoming one of the most powerful and dangerous men in the country. She'd married a sheep and betrayed a wolf. Now she was about to find out which one had been the real David Morrison all along. Chapter 3. The Anniversary Surprise. Le Jardin hummed with the quiet sophistication that only comes from $3 signs on Yelp and a reservation list longer than most wedding guest lists. David arrived first, as was his habit, wearing the same kind of modest suit he'd worn to every important dinner for the past 15 years. The maitre d' seated him at their usual table by the window, where he ordered a bottle of wine and waited. Jennifer arrived 20 minutes late, looking stunning in her new black dress and carrying what David recognized as a limited edition Hermes bag, one that cost more than their mortgage payment. She wasn't alone. "David, honey," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone he'd come to recognize as her performing for an audience voice. "I hope you don't mind, but I brought Patricia along. She's the lawyer I mentioned, the one who's been helping me with some paperwork." Patricia Valdez was exactly what David had expected from her reputation. Sharp, expensive, and radiating the kind of confidence that came from winning cases other lawyers wouldn't touch. She assessed David with the clinical precision of a surgeon examining a particularly interesting tumor. "Mr. Morrison," Patricia said, extending a hand that felt like shaking hand with a blade. "Jennifer has told me so much about you." David shook her hand, maintaining the mild, slightly confused expression he'd perfected over the years. "I'm sorry, I'm a bit confused. Jennifer, what kind of paperwork needs a lawyer? Is everything okay?" Jennifer exchanged a look with Patricia that David pretended not to catch. They'd rehearsed this, he realized. They'd planned every word, every gesture, choreographed to maximize his humiliation and minimize his ability to fight back. "David," Jennifer began, her voice taking on the patronizing tone usually reserved for explaining things to children. "I think we both know our marriage has been struggling lately. We've grown apart, and I think it's time we both admitted that we want different things." "I don't understand," David said, playing his part perfectly. "We've been happy, haven't we? I mean, we just planned this anniversary dinner to celebrate." "That's exactly the problem," Jennifer interrupted, her mask finally slipping to reveal the calculated coldness underneath. "You're satisfied with this? With us? With this ordinary little life we've built?" "But I'm not, David. I haven't been for a long time." Patricia opened her briefcase with the theatrical precision of a magician revealing their final trick. "Mr. Morrison, my client has prepared a comprehensive dissolution agreement. Given the straightforward nature of your assets and the mutual desire for an amicable separation, we're hoping this can be resolved quickly and quietly." David accepted the papers with hands that trembled just enough to be believable. As he scanned the first page, he let his face cycle through confusion, hurt, and finally, devastation. "Jennifer," he whispered, Are you really asking for half of everything? After 15 years, you want to just divide up our life like it's a business transaction?" "Don't be dramatic," Jennifer said, though there was an edge of impatience in her voice now. They'd expected him to be more cooperative. "It's not personal, David. It's just reality. I've wasted my prime years in this marriage, and I deserve compensation for that. For the opportunities one gave up, for the life I could have had. The words hit exactly as she'd intended them to, like bullets designed to wound. David let them show on his face, let his shoulders slump as if the weight of her betrayal was crushing him. Prime years, he repeated slowly. Wasted. Patricia's clients usually get much more aggressive in these situations, Jennifer continued, warming to her theme. But I'm being reasonable. 50% of assets, including the house, your 401k, and savings. I think that's more than fair, considering what I've sacrificed. Patricia leaned forward with the predatory smile that had made her famous in family court. My client deserves compensation for her suffering, Mr. Morrison. 15 years of supporting a marriage that clearly wasn't meeting her needs. The court will be very sympathetic to a woman who gave up her best years for a man who couldn't provide the life she deserved. David looked between them. These two women who thought they were dismantling the life of some helpless middle manager, and felt something cold and final settle in his chest. He thought about Jennifer's late nights with Ryan, about her casual cruelty in describing their marriage, about the complete lack of guilt or remorse on her face as she demanded payment for the privilege of betraying him. You know what? He said quietly, reaching into his jacket for a pen. You're absolutely right. Jennifer blinked, clearly not expecting capitulation this easy. You are right, David continued, signing the papers without reading them. You did waste your prime years. You do deserve compensation. And I think 50% is exactly what you should get. He slid the papers back across the table with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Patricia looked suspicious. No one gave up half their assets that easily, but Jennifer was practically glowing with triumph. I'm so glad you're being mature about this, Jennifer said, already mentally redecorating the life she'd build with Ryan. This really is for the best, David. For both of us. David finished his wine and stood up, dropping enough cash on the table to cover dinner and a generous tip. You know, Jennifer, I've learned something important tonight. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is give them exactly what they think they want. He paused at her chair, leaning down as if to kiss her goodbye. Instead, he whispered just loud enough for her to hear, I hope you enjoy your 50%. Walking out of Le Jardin, David felt lighter than he had in months. Behind him, Jennifer was already calling Ryan to share the good news, probably planning to celebrate their victory with champagne and dreams of the future they'd stolen from her fool of a husband. She had no idea that David Morrison, the man she'd just destroyed, didn't actually exist. The real David Morrison was someone else entirely. Someone who had just decided that Jennifer and Ryan deserved to learn exactly what happened to people who mistook his mercy for weakness. The next morning, David packed a single suitcase and vanished. Jennifer found only a note on the kitchen counter. Gonna process everything. We'll be in touch through lawyers. She probably thought he was off somewhere licking his wounds, maybe crying into a beer at some dive bar. She had no way of knowing he was actually on a private jet to Switzerland, where some very important people were waiting to help him orchestrate the most comprehensive destruction of two lives that money and power could arrange. By the time Forbes published their annual billionaire list 1 week later, Jennifer Morrison was about to discover that sometimes, when you reach for more than you deserve, you end up with far less than you started with. Chapter 4. The Billionaire List. Jennifer was sipping her morning coffee and scrolling through her phone when she saw it. Forbes magazine's annual billionaire list had just been released, and there, sitting at number 47 with a net worth of $3.2 billion, was a photo she recognized immediately. The coffee mug shattered against the kitchen floor. David Morrison, 43, investment management, read the caption under a professional headshot that looked nothing like the tired, ordinary man she'd been married to for 15 years. This David Morrison wore a $15,000 suit, had the bearing of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful people, and looked directly into the camera with eyes that seemed to see through everything. Her hands shaking, Jennifer fumbled for her phone and dialed a number she'd called exactly 71 times since discovering the article 3 hours ago. It went straight to voicemail, the same generic message that had been driving her insane all morning. David, it's me again, she said, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. I saw the Forbes article. and there must be some mistake. That can't be you. We need to talk. Please call me back. She hung up and immediately dialed again. This time, a different voice answered, crisp, professional, definitely not David. Mr. Morrison's office. How may I help you? Who is this? I'm trying to reach David Morrison. I'm his wife. A pause. I'm sorry, but Mr. Morrison is traveling and not taking personal calls. If you'd like to leave a message. Personal calls? Jennifer's voice cracked. I'm his wife. We've been married for 15 years. Another pause, longer this time. Ma'am, I'm going to need to verify your identity. Can you provide Mr. Morrison's social security number or the name of his primary financial institution? Jennifer realized with growing horror that she didn't know either. David had always handled their taxes, their banking, their investments. She'd been content to let him manage the boring financial details while she focused on her career and social life. We have a joint checking account at First National, she said weakly. I'm sorry, ma'am, but that's not matching our records. I'll have to ask you to contact our legal department if you wish to make any claims regarding Mr. Morrison. The line went dead. Jennifer sank into a kitchen chair, staring at the Forbes article on her phone. According to the brief bio, David Morrison had founded Morrison Capital 15 years ago, right around the time they'd gotten married. The fund specialized in strategic investments in emerging technologies and distressed assets, with a track record that had made him one of the youngest billionaires in the country. 15 years. He'd been building a financial empire the entire time she'd known him, and she'd never suspected a thing. Her phone rang, and she grabbed it eagerly, hoping it was David. Instead, Ryan's name flashed on the screen. Jen, baby, you're not going to believe what just happened, Ryan said without preamble. My credit cards were all declined this morning, and when I called the bank, they said my accounts had been frozen pending an investigation into fraudulent activity. They won't tell me anything else, just that I need to come in and speak with their fraud department. Ryan, Jennifer said slowly, have you seen the Forbes billionaire list? What? No, why would I wait? What does that have to do with my credit cards? Jennifer found herself laughing, a high, slightly hysterical sound. My ex-husband, is apparently worth $3 billion. And yesterday, I divorced him for 50% of what I thought was maybe $200,000 in assets. Silence on the other end of the line. That's impossible, Ryan said finally. David's a nobody. He drives a Honda and buys his clothes at Target. You showed me your bank statements. I showed you our checking account, Jennifer corrected. The account that apparently has nothing to do with his real money. But the divorce papers were for 50% of assets belonging to David Morrison, IT consultant, not David Morrison, billionaire investor. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. The papers I signed give me half of everything he owned as of yesterday. And as of yesterday, David Morrison, the IT consultant, owned exactly what we always thought he owned, a modest house, a small 401k, and about $30,000 in savings. Jennifer pulled up the Forbes article again, studying the photo with new eyes. This wasn't a different person. It was David with better lighting, better clothes, and the confidence that came from wielding real power. How had she never noticed the way he carried himself? The fact that he never seemed stressed about money? The phone calls he took in private, speaking in a voice she'd never heard him use? 15 years, she whispered. He played a character for 15 years. Ryan was saying something, but Jennifer wasn't listening. She was remembering things, the way David never seemed surprised by major news events, as if he'd known about them in advance. His uncanny ability to predict market crashes and recoveries. The expensive wine he occasionally brought home, claiming it was a gift from a grateful client. The calm, almost amused way he'd signed those divorce papers last night. I hope you enjoy your 50%, he'd said. At the time, she'd thought it was sarcasm. Now she realized it was a promise. Jennifer was still staring at her phone when the doorbell rang. Through the window, she could see a black sedan with government plates parked at her driveway. The FBI agents were polite, professional, and utterly uninterested in her protests of innocence. They had warrants to search the house and seize all financial records related to Jennifer Morrison, who was apparently under investigation for money laundering, tax evasion, and wire fraud. This has to be a mistake, Jennifer kept saying as they went through her belongings with methodical precision. I work in a marketing firm. I make $60,000 a year. I don't even understand what money laundering is. Agent Collins, a woman about Jennifer's age with tired eyes and no patience for dramatics, handed her a thick folder. Mrs. Morrison, according to our financial investigation, you've been moving significant sums of money through offshore accounts for the past 3 years. We have records of transactions totaling over $2 million, all traced back to accounts bearing your Social Security number and signature. Jennifer flipped through the folder with growing panic. Bank statements, wire transfer receipts, account opening documents, all bearing her name and signature, all documenting financial activity she'd never conducted. This is impossible, she said. I've never seen any of these accounts. These are my signatures. Handwriting analysis says otherwise, Agent Collins replied. And these accounts were accessed using computers registered to your home address during hours when you would have been present. As the agents continued their search, Jennifer's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. 50% of everything, as promised. Enjoy your new life. D. She tried calling the number immediately. It was disconnected. The Forbes article was still open on her phone. David's professional photo staring back at her with those penetrating eyes she'd somehow never really seen before. In the background of the photo, barely visible, was a wall of awards and accolades from organizations she'd never heard of him mention. Investment Manager of the Year, Humanitarian of the Decade, Strategic Advisor to Fortune 500 CEOs. Her husband, her boring, predictable, ordinary husband, was one of the most powerful men in the country. And she just handed him the perfect legal framework to destroy her life. By the time the FBI finished their search, Jennifer understood with crystal clarity that David Morrison had planned every moment of this. The hidden accounts, the perfect timing, the legal framework of their divorce, all of it designed to give her exactly what she'd asked for while destroying everything she'd actually wanted. She'd gotten 50% of everything David Morrison owned. The problem was, she'd been married to the wrong David Morrison all along. Chapter 5. The Setup. 3 days after the FBI raid, Jennifer sat in her lawyer's office, trying to understand how her life had become a nightmare. Patricia Valdez looked like a woman who'd aged 5 years and 72 hours, surrounded by stacks of legal documents, and wearing the expression of someone who'd just realized they'd been outmaneuvered by a grandmaster. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Patricia said, her voice tight with barely controlled frustration. Your husband, ex-husband, is worth $3 billion, but the divorce agreement we signed covers only the assets belonging to David Morrison, IT consultant, which means you're legally entitled to half of approximately $200,000, while David Morrison, investment manager, retains his entire fortune. That's not possible, Jennifer said for the 100th time. You can't have 2 different people with the same name and Social Security number. Actually, you can, Patricia replied grimly. I've spent the last 3 days with forensic accountants, and what your husband did was brilliant. Legally speaking, David Morrison, the IT consultant, and David Morrison, the billionaire, are the same person, but they maintain completely separate financial identities. The IT consultant owns everything you knew about: the house, the checking account, the modest retirement savings. The billionaire owns everything else, all held in trust structures and corporate entities that were specifically excluded from your marital property. Jennifer stared at the papers scattered across Patricia's desk. So the divorce is legal? Completely legal. And ironclad. Your husband spent years creating a paper trail that would make this outcome inevitable if you ever left him. Every asset you knew about was held in the name of David Morrison, IT consultant, resident of Oakwood Drive. Every asset you didn't know about was held by various entities controlled by David Morrison, investment manager, primary residence in the Cayman Islands. But that's fraud. No, Patricia said with the tone of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. That's the most sophisticated prenup I've ever seen, disguised as a lifestyle choice. He lived as a middle-class man while building a fortune as someone else entirely. And because you never questioned the disparity between his apparent income and your comfortable lifestyle, you never uncovered the truth. Jennifer felt like she was drowning. What about the FBI investigation? The account to my name? Patricia's expression grew even grimmer. That's where things get complicated. Someone, and I think we both know who, has spent considerable time and resources creating a financial history that makes you look like a sophisticated money launderer. The accounts are real, the transactions are real, and the signatures match yours perfectly. But I never opened those accounts. Can you prove that? Do you have alibis for every date those accounts were opened? Can you demonstrate that someone else had access to your personal information, your handwriting samples, your daily schedule? Jennifer opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. David had handled their taxes, their banking, their mail. He'd had access to everything he needed to create a false identity for her, and she'd never thought to question any of it. He's been planning this for years, she whispered. Probably since the day you married him, Patricia confirmed. The question now is what we do about it. Jennifer's phone had been ringing constantly since the Forbes article broke. Old friends, distant relatives, former colleagues. Everyone wanted to know if she was the Jennifer Morrison who'd been married to the billionaire. Some calls were congratulatory, assuming she'd struck it rich. Others were clearly fishing for loans or investments. A few were from reporters, offering money for her story. But the call that had shaken her most came from her sister Lisa in Phoenix. "Jen, I just saw the news," Lisa had said, "about David being a billionaire and about your divorce. Please tell me you got half of everything." "It's complicated," Jennifer had replied. "Complicated how? You were married for 15 years. In most states, that means you own half of whatever he accumulated during the marriage." Jennifer had tried to explain the legal technicalities, but Lisa's response was the same as everyone else's. How could you not know your husband was worth billions? The answer was becoming clearer and more humiliating every day. She hadn't known because she hadn't wanted to know. She'd been content to live off David's supposed IT salary while spending money she never questioned. When David bought expensive wine, she assumed he'd gotten a good deal. When her mortgage payments seemed low for their neighborhood, she figured David was good with money. When he paid for her graduate degree without taking out loans, she thought he was just fiscally responsible. She'd been willfully blind because the alternative, actually paying attention to their finances, taking responsibility for their joint future, asking hard questions about money, required effort she hadn't wanted to expend. She'd prefer to focus on her career, her social life, her affair with Ryan, while David quietly built an empire she couldn't even comprehend. "There's something else," Patricia said, pulling Jennifer back to the present. "I've been contacted by Ryan Hutchins' attorney. Apparently, he's also under federal investigation, and he's claiming that you recruited him into some kind of conspiracy to defraud your husband." "That's insane. Ryan doesn't even know about David's money." "Are you sure about that?" "Because the evidence suggests otherwise. Bank records show that Ryan received 3 wire transfers totaling $50,000 from one of the accounts linked to your name. The transfers were made over the course of your affair, always within 24 hours of your hotel meetings." Jennifer's mind reeled. "That's impossible. Ryan's been broke this whole time. He couldn't even pay for dinner without borrowing money." According to the FBI, those payments were labeled as consulting fees for services related to asset evaluation and strategic planning. They have records of Ryan researching your husband's background, your neighborhood property values, and local divorce law. From the outside, it looks like you hired your lover to help you plan the perfect divorce. "David did this," Jennifer said with growing certainty. "He set this up. He made those payments. He created those records. Can you prove that? Because from where I sit, the evidence against you and Ryan is overwhelming, and the evidence against your ex-husband is non-existent. David Morrison looks like the victim of a sophisticated conspiracy between his wife and her lover to defraud him of his assets." Jennifer slumped in her chair, finally understanding the scope of what David had done. He hadn't just hidden his wealth. He'd constructed an elaborate trap that made her look like the criminal and him look like the victim. Every piece of evidence that could prove his deception could also be used to prove her guilt. "What do I do?" she asked. Patricia gathered the papers on her desk with the efficiency of someone eager to end an unwinnable case. Honestly, you pray that your ex-husband decides he's done playing with you. Because right now, he holds all the cards, and he's the only one who can make this investigation disappear. What does that mean? It means David Morrison spent 15 years building the perfect revenge fantasy, and you walked right into it. The question now is whether he wants to destroy you completely, or if he's satisfied with just taking everything you thought you wanted. As Jennifer left Patricia's office, her phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Hope you're enjoying your 50%. The real fun starts tomorrow. She tried calling the number again. Still disconnected. But this time, there was a second message waiting. Ask Ryan about the Turks and Caicos account. Jennifer's blood ran cold. She didn't know what the Turks and Caicos account was, but she had a feeling she was about to find out. And whatever it was going to make her situation much, much worse. Chapter 6. The Trap Springs. Ryan's apartment was in chaos when Jennifer arrived. Boxes scattered across the floor, furniture covered in plastic, and Ryan himself sitting in the middle of it all with the hollow-eyed look of a man whose world had just collapsed. "They're evicting me," he said without looking up. "Apparently, I'm 3 months behind on rent, even though I paid it every month. But the checks were all returned for insufficient funds, and now they're saying I owe late fees and penalties on top of the back rent." Jennifer picked her way through the debris and sat down across from him. "Ryan, what's the Turks and Caicos account?" His head snapped up. "How do you know about that?" "David texted me. He told me to ask you about it." Ryan's face went through several expressions: panic, guilt, resignation, before settling on exhausted defeat. It was supposed to be a surprise. What was supposed to be a surprise? The account. I opened it 6 months ago after my uncle died and left me some money. It was going to be our escape fund, money David couldn't touch in the divorce, money we could use to start over somewhere tropical. Jennifer felt the familiar sensation of the ground shifting beneath her feet. "Your uncle died? You never mentioned an uncle." "He wasn't really my uncle. He was my dad's business partner from way back. But he left me $50,000, and I thought if I put it offshore, we could have something that was just ours when all this was over." $50,000, Jennifer repeated slowly. "The same amount the FBI says you received from accounts linked to my name." Ryan's eyes widened. "Wait, what?" "No, that's not. The money came from my uncle's estate. I have all the paperwork." "Show me." Ryan disappeared into his bedroom and returned with a manila folder. Inside were all the documents related to his inheritance: the death certificate, the will, the bank transfers. Everything looked legitimate, down to the law firm letterhead and notary stamps. Jennifer studied the papers with growing unease. "Ryan, what was your uncle's name?" "Harold Morrison. He went by Harry." The folder slipped from Jennifer's hands. "Morrison? Yeah, it's just a coincidence. Pretty weird, right? I mean, what are the odds that my girlfriend husband and my dead uncle would have the same last name?" Jennifer stared at Ryan with the dawning realization that he was either the best actor she'd ever met or completely innocent of the trap they'd both walked into. "Ryan, there is no Harold Morrison in your family. There never was." "What are you talking about?" "I have all the documentation. Documentation that David created. Don't you see? He's been planning this for months, maybe years. He knew about our affair before we did. He created a fake uncle, a fake inheritance, and a fake offshore account that matches exactly with the money the FBI thinks I paid you." Ryan looked like he'd been punched. "That's impossible. The lawyers, the bank transfers, the death certificate. All fake. All part of an elaborate setup to make us look like criminals." Jennifer was pacing now, the pieces falling into place with terrifying clarity. "Think about it, Ryan. How we meet. You got hired at my company right around the time things started getting bad in my marriage. You started pursuing me just when I was most vulnerable. You had all these stories about family money and business opportunities, but every time I asked for specifics, you changed the subject. Because I was embarrassed. My family's business really was failing, and I was trying to impress you with stories David fed you. Think, Ryan, how did you know so much about real estate law? How did you know exactly what buttons to push to make me dissatisfied with my marriage? How did you know David would be easy to divorce?" Ryan was shaking his head, but his eyes showed the growing awareness of someone who'd been played by a master. You're saying, David, what? That he hired me to seduce his own wife. I'm saying David found a broke, ambitious man with flexible morals and created the perfect trap. He gave you just enough truth about your financial problems, about your desire for a better life, and wrapped it in lies that would make you the perfect weapon to destroy our marriage. Jennifer's phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, Jennifer. David's voice was exactly as she remembered it. Calm, measured, completely in control. I thought it was time we talked. David. She put the phone on speaker so Ryan could hear. How long have you been planning this? Planning what? Your divorce? You planned it yourself, darling. I just made sure you got exactly what you asked for. The FBI investigation, the fake inheritance, the offshore accounts. I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm just a simple IT consultant who discovered his wife was having an affair. Jennifer could hear the smile in his voice. Cut the act, David. I know who you really are. Do you? Because I'm not sure you ever did. You spent 15 years married to a man you never bothered to really know. You never asked where the money came from. You never questioned how we could afford our lifestyle on my supposed salary. You never wondered why I was never stressed about finances during market crashes that destroyed other people's retirement savings. I trusted you. No, David said quietly. You ignored me. There's a difference. You were so busy building your own life, your own career, your own romantic fantasies that you never saw the man you'd married. And when someone more exciting came along, you didn't hesitate to throw away 15 years for a few stolen moments in hotel rooms. Ryan grabbed the phone. Listen, you bastard. Whatever you've done to Jennifer, she doesn't deserve. David's laugh cut him off. Oh, Ryan. Still playing the hero, I see. Tell me, how does it feel to discover that your great love affair was just another business transaction? That every word you spoke to Jennifer, every romantic gesture, every promise about your future together, all that was scripted by the husband you were helping her betray? That's not true, Ryan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Let me ask you something, Ryan. When you applied for the job at Jennifer's company, who recommended you? When you got that first apartment across town, who co-signed your lease? When you bought that BMW you couldn't afford, who guaranteed the loan? Silence. Check the paperwork, Ryan. Really look at it this time. Check the signatures on your lease, your car loan, your job application. See if you recognize the handwriting. Jennifer watched the color drain from Ryan's face as understanding dawned. David hadn't just manipulated their affair, he'd created it. Every circumstance that brought them together, every opportunity for them to betray their marriage, every step toward the divorce had been orchestrated by the man they thought they were deceiving. The beautiful thing about revenge, David continued, is that the best kind gives people exactly what they think they want. Jennifer wanted a more exciting life with a man who could give her everything I supposedly couldn't. Ryan wanted money and status, and a woman who could help him achieve both. So I gave them everything they asked for. And what did you get? Jennifer asked. Justice, David replied, and the satisfaction of watching two people who think they're smarter than everyone else discover that they're not nearly as clever as they believed. The line went dead. Jennifer and Ryan sat in silence for a long moment, surrounded by the wreckage of their carefully constructed lies. Finally, Ryan spoke. How long do you think he's been watching us? Probably since the day we met, Jennifer replied. Maybe longer. What do we do now? Jennifer looked around Ryan's destroyed apartment, thought about her own FBI investigation, considered the divorce papers that had seemed like such a victory just days ago. I think, she said slowly, we're about to find out just how thoroughly David Morrison can destroy two people when he really puts his mind to it. Outside, a black sedan sat at the end of the street, its occupants taking photographs with long-range lenses. Neither Jennifer nor Ryan noticed it. They were too busy trying to understand how completely they'd been outmaneuvered by a man they dismissed as ordinary. But David Morrison had never been ordinary. He'd just been patient. And now, finally, it was time for the real punishment to begin. Chapter 7, The Unraveling. 2 weeks after the phone call, Jennifer's world had collapsed so completely that she sometimes wondered if her old life had been real at all. The FBI investigation had expanded into a full-scale financial crimes task force, with agents tracking what they believed was an international money laundering operation spanning 3 countries and involving dozens of shell companies. Jennifer sat in a federal holding cell, waiting for her lawyer to arrange bail she couldn't afford. The house was gone, seized as evidence, and sold to cover restitution for her alleged crimes. Her job was gone, terminated immediately when the indictment was unsealed. Her bank accounts were frozen, her credit cards canceled, her entire financial existence erased with surgical precision. The most damning evidence had surfaced just days ago. Video surveillance from various banks showing Jennifer Morrison opening accounts, making transactions, and signing documents that she had no memory of creating. The woman in the videos looked exactly like her, moved like her, even had her distinctive jewelry and handbags. Deep fake technology, her public defender had explained with the weary tone of someone who'd seen too many impossible cases. Sophisticated enough to fool any jury. And the financial paper trail is bulletproof. Whoever set this up spent years creating a version of your life that makes you look like a criminal mastermind. Ryan was in an even worse position. His inheritance had been traced to a complex network of offshore accounts that the FBI claimed were used to fund international arms dealers. He was facing charges that could put him away for 20 years, and unlike Jennifer, he couldn't even afford a public defender. The irony wasn't lost on Jennifer that she was now living the life she'd always feared: public humiliation, financial ruin, complete social isolation. Every news story about her case mentioned her affair, her divorce, her attempt to defraud billionaire husband David Morrison. The comment sections were particularly brutal, filled with people who seemed to take personal satisfaction in her downfall. Gold-digging wife gets what she deserves. Should have appreciated what she had instead of cheating. This is what happens when you try to scam someone smarter than you. What made it worse was that Jennifer couldn't even defend herself without sounding delusional. Who would believe that David Morrison, victim of financial fraud and betrayed husband, had actually orchestrated the entire scheme? Who would take her word against that of a billionaire philanthropist who donated millions to charity and employed thousands of people? The answer came during her 3rd week in custody, when she received an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Morrison? The woman was younger than Jennifer, well-dressed, with the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. "My name is Rachel Chun. I'm an investigative journalist with the Washington Post." Jennifer almost laughed. "If you're here for an interview, I don't have much to say. Everything I could tell you would just sound like the desperate lies of a guilty woman." "Actually," Rachel said, settling into the plastic chair across from Jennifer, "I'm here because I think your husband has done this before." That got Jennifer's attention. "I've been investigating David Morrison for 6 months," Rachel continued. "Not the billionaire philanthropist, the pattern. 3 other women in the past 20 years, all divorced from men named David Morrison, all facing federal charges for financial crimes, all claiming their ex-husbands framed them." Jennifer's heart started racing. 3 others? Amanda Clark in Seattle, Michelle Rodriguez in Austin, Catherine Wells in Miami, all married to men they believed were middle-class professionals, all cheated on their husbands, all divorced under remarkably similar circumstances, all charged with financial crimes they claim they didn't commit. Where are they now? Rachel's expression grew grim. Amanda died in prison 3 years into her sentence, officially suicide, though she'd been maintaining her innocence and fighting her case right up until the end. Michelle served 8 years and was released last year, completely broke and unemployable. Catherine is still serving time in a federal facility in Florida. Jennifer felt like she was falling through the floor. So, this is what he does. He marries women, waits for them to cheat, then destroys their lives. I think it's more sophisticated than that. I think David Morrison has spent the last 20 years perfecting the art of psychological manipulation and legal revenge. Each case has gotten more elaborate, more thorough, more impossible to escape. But why? What does he get out of it? Rachel pulled out a tablet and showed Jennifer a series of photographs, social media posts, charity events, interviews. In each one, David Morrison appeared as the grieving, betrayed husband who'd overcome personal tragedy to build something meaningful with his life. Control, Rachel said simply. And vindication. He's built his entire public persona around being the victim who rose above his circumstances. The faithful husband betrayed by ungrateful wives. The honest businessman who succeeds despite personal setbacks. The philanthropist who helps others because he understands suffering. Jennifer studied the photos with growing horror. There was David at a charity gala, speaking about supporting victims of domestic abuse. David receiving an award for his work with families affected by divorce. David being interviewed about the importance of trust in marriage, with the caption, "Billionaire who lost 3 wives to infidelity speaks about forgiveness." 3 wives, Jennifer repeated. I'm the 4th, and probably not the last. I think David Morrison has turned revenge into an art form, and you're just his latest masterpiece. Can you prove any of this? Rachel's expression grew cautious. That's the problem. David Morrison is very good at what he does. Every piece of evidence I've found could be explained away as coincidence or confirmation bias. 3 women married to men with the same name who all happened to commit financial crimes? For if we include you, it sounds like a conspiracy theory. But you believe us. I believe there's a pattern here that goes beyond coincidence. But belief isn't proof, and David Morrison has too much money and too much power for me to go after him without ironclad evidence. Jennifer leaned back in her chair, processing everything Rachel had told her. So we're all just going to prison for crimes we didn't commit while he moves on to victim number 5? Maybe, Rachel said, unless we can find a way to prove what he's really doing. Ow! Rachel hesitated. I have an idea, but it's risky, and it would require you to trust me completely, even when it looks like I'm abandoning you. I'm facing 20 years in federal prison for crimes I didn't commit. How much worse can it get? Famous last words, Rachel said with a slight smile. But you're right. At this point, what do you have to lose? As Rachel explained her plan, Jennifer realized that the journalist was proposing something almost as elaborate and risky as David's original scheme. It would require perfect timing, careful misdirection, and a level of trust between strangers that Jennifer wasn't sure she was capable of anymore. But as she sat in her federal holding cell, wearing prison orange and facing the complete destruction of everything she'd ever worked for, Jennifer realized she didn't have any choice. David Morrison had trapped her in a perfect cage of legal evidence and public humiliation. The only way out was to become someone just as ruthless and calculating as the man who'd put her there. Okay, she said finally. What do you need me to do? Rachel smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Jennifer saw something in another person's eyes that looked like hope. First, Rachel said, we need to talk to Michelle Rodriguez. She's been waiting 20 years for someone to believe her story. And she's developed some very interesting theories about exactly how David Morrison chooses his victims. As Jennifer was led back to her cell, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to become part of something much larger and more dangerous than her own personal revenge story. But after weeks of feeling helpless and trapped, the possibility of fighting back, even if it meant risking everything, felt like the first real choice she'd had since her world began falling apart. David Morrison thought he'd won. He thought Jennifer was just another broken victim in his collection of perfect crimes. He was about to discover that some people, when pushed far enough, become more dangerous than he'd ever anticipated. Chapter 8. The Countertrap. Michelle Rodriguez lived in a studio apartment above a laundromat in the worst part of Austin, her law degree reduced to a certificate on the wall, and her career destroyed by a federal conviction that followed her everywhere. When Jennifer and Rachel arrived on a Tuesday evening, Michelle was working on her 3rd job of the day, transcribing medical records for $12 an hour. I wondered when someone would finally come, Michelle said without looking up from her computer. I've been expecting a visit like this for 8 years. She was 43, rail-thin, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of exhausted dignity that came from surviving something that should have destroyed her. Her apartment was spotless and sparse, containing exactly what someone needed to live and nothing more. You knew we'd come? Jennifer asked. David Morrison is a creature of habit, Michelle replied. finally turning around. He likes patterns, repetition, the satisfaction of a system that works perfectly every time. After Amanda died and Catherine went to prison, I knew he'd do it again. And when the Forbes list came out last month with his updated net worth, I knew the next victim was about to discover who she'd really married. Rachel pulled out her recording equipment. Michelle, are you willing to go on record about what happened to you? I've been waiting 8 years for someone to ask me that question. Michelle closed her laptop and gave them her complete attention. But first, you need to understand something. David Morrison didn't choose us randomly. He has a very specific type, and there's a reason his system works so perfectly. Jennifer shifted uncomfortably. What do you mean? Show me your college photos, Michelle said. Confused, Jennifer pulled out her phone and scrolled to some old pictures from her sorority days. Michelle studied them for a moment, then walked to a small box on her bookshelf. Inside were photographs of herself from 20 years ago. Young, blonde, professionally dressed, with the kind of confident smile that came from believing the world was full of possibilities. The resemblance was unmistakable. Not identical, but clearly the same type. Attractive, ambitious, upper-middle-class women with similar builds and coloring. Amanda looked like us too, Michelle continued. And Catherine. David Morrison doesn't just marry randomly. He has a template, and he shops for wives the same way other people shop for cars. Rachel was taking notes furiously. How does he find you? Professional conferences, alumni events, places where successful women in their late 20s gather. He studies you for weeks before making contact, learns your background, your vulnerabilities, your relationship history. By the time he introduces himself, he already knows exactly what kind of man you're looking for. Jennifer thought back to the coffee shop where she'd met David, how perfectly he'd seemed to understand her frustrations with dating, how naturally their conversation had flowed. So our entire relationship was planned. From the first conversation, David Morrison doesn't believe in love, Jennifer. He believes in control. He studies women the way other people study chess problems, looking for the perfect sequence of moves that will give him total power over your life. Michelle walked to her kitchen and returned with a thick folder. I've spent 8 years putting together everything I could find about David's pattern. Financial records, court documents, news articles, even social media posts from his victims' friends and family. Want to know what I discovered? She spread the contents across her small table. A complex timeline spanning 25 years, starting with David's first marriage when he was just 22 years old. His name wasn't always David Morrison, Michelle said. He was born David Kellerman in Ohio, the son of a small-town accountant who embezzled money from local businesses and died in prison when David was 16. David changed his name when he turned 18 and started building his fortune using techniques his father had taught him, creating false identities, moving money through complex networks, making himself invisible while manipulating other people's lives. Rachel studied the timeline with growing excitement. You're saying David Morrison, the billionaire investor, is also a fake identity? One of many. Over the past 25 years, he's been David Morrison, David Kellerman, David Matthews, and probably a dozen other names. Each identity has its own financial network, its own background story, its own carefully constructed life. When he's done destroying one wife, he simply becomes someone else and starts shopping for the next victim. Jennifer felt sick. How many women has he done this to? That I can prove? 4, including you. But I suspect there are others, women who died or disappeared or were so thoroughly broken they never try to fight back. Michelle's voice remained calm, but her eyes showed the rage of someone who'd spent years thinking about revenge. David Morrison has turned the systematic destruction of women's lives into his personal hobby, and no one's ever stopped him? How? He's brilliant, patient, and completely ruthless. He chooses victims who fit a specific profile, successful enough to be worth destroying, but not powerful enough to fight back effectively. He builds cases that are legally bulletproof, and he presents himself to the world as the victim, the faithful husband who keeps getting betrayed by ungrateful wives. Rachel looked up from her notes. Michelle, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Did you cheat on David? Michelle was quiet for a long moment. Yes. with a man I later discovered was an actor David had hired to seduce me. The entire affair was scripted, Jennifer, down to the romantic gestures and promises about our future together. David created a man designed to exploit my specific emotional vulnerabilities, then sat back and watched me destroy my marriage with someone who was literally reading from a script. Jennifer's hands started shaking. Ryan. He did the same thing with Ryan. Of course he did. David's system works because it gives you the illusion of choice while actually controlling every variable. You think you're rebelling against your boring marriage, but you're actually following a path he designed specifically for you. The three women sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the full scope of what David had created. Not just individual revenge schemes, but an entire system for identifying, manipulating, and destroying women who fit his preferred victim profile. Finally, Rachel spoke. Michelle, Jennifer, I think we can stop him. But it's going to require something that's never been tried before. What? We're going to give David Morrison exactly what he wants most, another victim. Someone who fits his pattern perfectly. Someone vulnerable enough to manipulate. Someone he can't resist adding to his collection. Jennifer frowned. You want to set up another woman to be destroyed? No. Rachel said with a smile that was equal parts excitement and determination. I want to set up David Morrison to destroy himself. Because I think his greatest strength, his absolute confidence in his system, might also be his greatest weakness. As Rachel explained her plan, Jennifer realized the journalist was proposing something that was either brilliant or completely insane. It would require perfect acting, enormous risk, and the kind of coordinated deception that David himself had perfected. But it might also be the only way to give a monster exactly what he deserved. Are you in? Rachel asked. Jennifer looked around Michelle's tiny apartment, thought about Catherine Wells still sitting in federal prison, remembered Amanda Clark who died, maintaining her innocence, considered her own future as David Morrison's fourth convicted victim. I'm in, she said. Let's destroy the bastard. Michelle smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. Finally, I've been waiting 8 years to hear someone say those words. Outside Michelle's window, the city lights stretched toward the horizon, full of possibilities and hidden dangers. Somewhere out there, David Morrison was probably already selecting his next victim, confident that his perfect system would work exactly as it always had. He had no way of knowing that 3 women who should have stayed broken were about to turn his own tactics against him, or that his next victim would be someone specifically designed to give him everything he thought he wanted while destroying everything he'd built. The hunter was about to become the prey, and David Morrison was about to learn that some games were more dangerous than others. Chapter 9. Perfect Justice. 6 months later, David Morrison met Dr. Sarah Elizabeth Hartwell at a pharmaceutical industry conference in Chicago. She was everything his previous victims had been: beautiful, intelligent, professionally successful, but with one crucial difference. Dr. Hartwell was actually FBI Special Agent Sarah Beth Hamilton, working undercover with the full resources of a federal task force that had been quietly building a case against David Morrison for conspiracy, racketeering, and systematic fraud spanning multiple decades. The task force had been Rachel Chen's idea, born from months of collaboration between her investigative reporting and Jennifer's inside knowledge of David's methods. When presented with Michelle's evidence and Jennifer's first-hand account, the FBI had realized they weren't looking at isolated financial crimes. They were looking at one of the most sophisticated serial fraud operations in American history. Agent Hamilton had spent weeks preparing for her role as David's next victim. She'd studied his pattern, learned his preferences, and crafted a background designed to trigger all his psychological triggers. She was recently divorced from a man who'd left her for a younger woman, financially successful but emotionally vulnerable, and attending the conference alone after her research partner had canceled at the last minute. David approached her at the hotel bar with the same carefully calculated charm he'd used on Jennifer, Michelle, Amanda, and Catherine. Within an hour, he was telling her about his own recent divorce from a wife who'd tried to steal his money, his work as a strategic consultant, his modest lifestyle despite his professional success. Sarah was fascinated by David's stories, impressed by his humility, and grateful for the attention of someone who seemed to understand her recent romantic disappointments. When he suggested dinner the following evening, she accepted with exactly the right combination of enthusiasm and careful reserve. Over the next 3 months, David Morrison executed his pattern with precision. He courted Sarah with romantic gestures that seemed spontaneous, but followed the exact same sequence he'd used with his previous victims. He shared carefully edited stories about his past relationships, positioning himself as the victim of ungrateful women who'd never appreciated his devotion. He gradually increased the intimacy of their relationship while subtly criticizing her ex-husband and encouraging her dissatisfaction with her current life. Every conversation was recorded. Every financial transaction was monitored. Every aspect of David's manipulation was documented by agents who understood exactly what they were watching. The breakthrough came when David began setting up Sarah's destruction. Following his established pattern, he started creating false financial accounts in her name, building the paper trail that would eventually make her look like a money launderer and federal criminal. But this time, instead of an unwitting victim, he was targeting someone who could document every step of his fraud in real time. When David hired an actor to play Dr. Marcus Webb, the charming colleague designed to seduce Sarah away from their relationship, the FBI was ready. Dr. Webb was actually Agent Timothy Foster, who played his role perfectly while wearing recording devices that captured David's detailed instructions about how to manipulate Sarah's emotions and destroy her trust in their relationship. The final trap was sprung on what should have been Sarah's destruction. David had arranged for her to discover evidence of her own supposed financial crimes, planted carefully to make her look guilty while keeping his hands completely clean. But instead of a panicked woman discovering she'd been framed, David found himself surrounded by federal agents executing arrest warrants for fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, and multiple counts of identity theft. David Kellerman, Agent Hamilton said, using his birth name as she placed him in handcuffs, "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering, money laundering, and approximately 24 other federal crimes spanning the past 25 years. For the first time in his adult life, David Morrison looked genuinely surprised. The trial became the most closely watched white-collar prosecution of the decade. Jennifer, Michelle, and Catherine, who was released pending David's trial, all testified about their experiences. Amanda Clark's family provided evidence from her case. Most damning of all were the recordings of David instructing Agent Foster on exactly how to manipulate Sarah's emotions, combined with financial records showing his systematic creation of false evidence designed to frame his victims. David's defense team tried to argue that he was a victim of vindictive ex-wives and an overzealous FBI task force. They portrayed him as a successful businessman who'd been unlucky in love, targeted by women who wanted his money and investigators who wanted a high-profile conviction. The jury wasn't buying it. When the recordings were played of David explaining to Agent Foster how to break down her defenses and make her feel guilty for trusting anyone but me, the courtroom fell silent. When financial experts demonstrated how David had systematically created false identities for his victims over the course of decades, several jurors visibly recoiled. Most devastating was Michelle Rodriguez's testimony about her 8 years in prison for crimes she hadn't committed, delivered with the quiet dignity of someone who'd survived something that should have destroyed her. David Morrison didn't just steal money, she told the jury. He stole lives. He stole time. He stole the futures of women who made the mistake of trusting him. And he did it all while presenting himself as the victim, collecting sympathy and admiration for surviving the betrayal of ungrateful wives. The verdict was unanimous on all counts. David Morrison was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole, with additional restitution payments that would strip him of every asset he'd accumulated through his criminal enterprise. But for Jennifer, the real satisfaction came from the civil suits that followed. With David's criminal conviction, the evidence of his fraud was overwhelming. Every victim received significant financial compensation from his seized assets. More importantly, the convictions that had destroyed their lives were all overturned. Jennifer used her settlement to start a foundation supporting women who'd been victimized by systematic fraud and manipulation. Michelle returned to law school and became a prosecutor specializing in financial crimes. Catherine started a support group for federal prisoners who'd been wrongfully convicted. Amanda Clark's family received a formal apology from the federal government and a settlement that helped establish a scholarship in her name for women studying criminal justice. The final piece of justice came from an unexpected source. Ryan Hutchins, who had been released when David's conspiracy was exposed, chose to testify about his own manipulation and the way David had exploited his financial desperation to turn him into an unwitting accomplice. "I thought I was seducing another man's wife," Ryan told the court during the sentencing phase. "I had no idea I was just a puppet in someone else's revenge fantasy." David Morrison didn't just destroy marriages. He destroyed the people who trusted him, the people who worked for him, and the people who got caught up in his schemes without ever knowing they were being used. On the day David Morrison was led away in shackles, Jennifer stood outside the federal courthouse with Michelle, Catherine, and Rachel. For the first time in over a year, she felt like herself again. Not David's victim, not the woman who'd been systematically broken down and rebuilt as a criminal, but Jennifer Morrison, someone who'd survived something terrible and used that survival to protect other people. "Think he'll appeal?" Catherine asked. "Probably," Rachel replied, "but it won't matter. We have too much evidence, and the FBI is still investigating cases that could go back even further than we thought." Jennifer looked up at the courthouse, where David Morrison would spend the rest of his life paying for what he'd done to them and others. "Do you think he understands why he lost?" Michelle considered the question. "I think David Morrison spent so many years being smarter than everyone else that he forgot the most important rule of any con game. Eventually, you meet someone who's smarter than you are. He just never expected it to be a group of women he thought he'd already destroyed." As they walked away from the courthouse, Jennifer felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year, the possibility of a future that belonged entirely to her. David Morrison had given her exactly what she'd asked for, 50% of everything he owned. It just took a federal task force and a complex undercover operation to make sure she actually got it. The predator who'd spent decades hunting women like her was finally in a cage where he belonged. And the women he'd tried to destroy had not only survived, they'd become the instruments of his destruction. Justice, Jennifer realized, wasn't always swift. But when it finally arrived, it was absolutely perfect. David Morrison would spend the rest of his life in federal prison, where his wealth, his charm, and his elaborate schemes were worthless. The man who'd built his empire on the systematic destruction of women's lives would end his days powerless, forgotten, and utterly alone. For Jennifer Morrison and the other women whose lives he'd tried to destroy, that was exactly the ending this story deserved. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Raul Gilmore had built his life the same way he built houses, carefully, with attention to every detail. At 34, he owned a small but successful construction company in rural Pennsylvania, employed 8 good men, and came home every night to what he thought was a loving family. He met Desiree Parker 7 years ago at a community fundraiser. She was beautiful, charming, and seemed to genuinely admire his work ethic. Her father, Wayne Parker, had been harder to win over, a gruff ex-convict who'd served time for aggravated assault in his youth. But Raul, having served 2 tours in Afghanistan as an army engineer, didn't scare easily. He'd extended an olive branch, hired Wayne occasionally for demolition work, and slowly earned what he believed was the older man's respect. Their son, 6-year-old Tommy, was Raul's whole world. The boy had his father's sharp mind and his mother's striking green eyes. Every evening, Raul taught him something new: how to use a level, how to read a blueprint, how to think 3 steps ahead. Tommy absorbed it all like a sponge. But lately, something felt wrong. Raoul noticed the way Desiree's phone screen went dark whenever he entered a room. The hushed conversations with her father that stopped abruptly when he appeared. The life insurance agent who'd visited 3 times in 2 months, each time while Raoul was at a job site. "Just updating our policies," Desiree had said, kissing his cheek with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "With the business growing, we need better coverage." It made sense, but his instincts, honed by years of watching for IEDs in Kandahar, screamed otherwise. That Friday night, Raoul came home early from a job that had finished ahead of schedule. He found Desiree and Wayne in the kitchen, speaking in low, urgent tones over a stack of papers. They separated the moment they heard his truck. "Hey, babe." Desiree's voice was too bright. "Didn't expect you so soon. Crew worked fast." Raoul's eyes flicked to the papers Wayne was now casually sliding into a folder. "What's going on?" "Just looking at the old shed out back," Wayne said, his weathered face unreadable. "Thinking it's time to tear it down. Structure's unsound. Dangerous, especially with Tommy playing near it." Raoul nodded slowly. He'd built that shed himself 5 years ago. It was solid. "I can handle it next week." "No need," Wayne said. "Desiree and I can knock it down tomorrow. Quick job. You've got enough on your plate." Something in the way they looked at each other made Raoul's skin crawl. That night, Raoul lay awake while Desiree slept beside him, or pretended to. He could tell by her breathing that she was awake too, lost in her own thoughts. At 2 a.m., he heard her phone buzz. She slipped out of bed and into the bathroom. Through the door, he heard her whispered voice. "Tomorrow." "Yes." Finally, "No. He won't suspect anything." Raoul's blood ran cold. The next morning, he called his old army buddy, Bernard Hancock, who now ran a private investigation firm in Pittsburgh. "Bernie, I need a favor." Quietly. "Name it, brother." "Look into my wife's recent activities. Phone records, financials, anything unusual. And run a check on Wayne Parker. See if he's been in contact with anyone from his past." "How soon?" "Yesterday." Bernie heard the edge in Raoul's voice. "I'll have preliminary stuff by tonight." "You okay?" "No," Raoul said honestly. "But I will be." That afternoon, Wayne and Desiree arrived at the house. Wayne's truck held sledgehammers, pry bars, and a strange eagerness in both their eyes. "We're going to start on the shed," Desiree announced. "Tommy, why don't you help Dad clean out the garage?" But Tommy clung to Raoul's leg. "I want to watch the shed come down." "Not safe, buddy," Raoul said, ruffling his son's hair. But he noticed how Desiree's jaw tightened, how Wayne's eyes narrowed with irritation. "Actually," Desiree said, her voice taking on a saccharine quality, "there's one box left inside. Why don't you and Tommy grab it before we start? It's got some of your old things." Raoul knew that box. He'd put it there himself last month. There was nothing in it worth saving, just damaged drywall samples and broken tools he'd meant to dispose of. "Sure," he said, watching her face carefully. "Come on, Tommy." As they walked toward the shed, Raoul's phone buzzed. A text from Bernie. "Urgent. Don't go anywhere with your wife alone. Insurance policy for $1.5 million taken out on you last month. Wayne's been in contact with Art Carver, known insurance fraud specialist. Call me now." Raoul's heart hammered. He looked back at the house. Wayne was positioning himself near the main support beams of the shed. Desiree stood by the corner post, watching them with an expression Raoul had never seen before. Cold calculation. They weren't tearing down a shed. They were tearing down a tomb, with him and Tommy inside. "Dad," Tommy whispered, sensing his father's tension. "I'm scared. Stay close to me, son." Raoul's mind raced. If he refused to go in, they'd know he was onto them. If he went in and tried to fight his way out, Tommy could get hurt in the chaos. He needed to think like he had in the war, survive first, strike back later. They stepped into the dim shed. The shed smelled of motor oil and old wood. Raoul grabbed Tommy's hand as they moved toward the back where the box supposedly waited. Through the cracks in the weathered walls, he could see shadows moving outside. "There's the box, Dad," Tommy pointed. Raoul picked it up. It was far too light. He opened it. "Empty. Get out." Wayne's voice roared from outside. The first support beam crashed down. Then the second. The roof groaned and began to collapse. Raoul threw himself over Tommy, shielding his son as lumber and corrugated metal rained down on them. A beam caught Raoul's shoulder with brutal force. Another slammed across his ribs. He felt something crack. Pain exploded through his body as they crumpled to the dirt floor. Blood ran hot down his face from a gash on his scalp. More debris piled on top of them, pinning them under hundreds of pounds of wood and metal. Through the ringing in his ears, Raoul heard laughter. Finally, Desiree's voice, breathless with excitement. "Is it done? Let's make sure." Wayne's heavy footsteps approached. No movement. "Think we're good." Raoul wanted to rage, to roar, to tear through the wreckage and strangle them both. But then he felt Tommy trembling beneath him, and he understood. If they knew Tommy was alive, they'd finish the job. He put his lips to his son's ear. "Don't make a sound," he breathed. "Play dead." Tommy went still, his small body pressed against his father's chest. More footsteps. Closer now. "Did you hear something?" Desiree asked. "Just the structure settling. They're done. Trust me, I've seen enough dead men to know." "The insurance adjuster will rule it accidental," Desiree said. "Old structure, tragic collapse. The whole town knows Wayne's been saying it was unsafe. We got witnesses who heard us warn Raoul about it. Smart girl, just like your mother was." "Your mother?" That confused Raoul, but he stayed frozen. "So, when do we get the money?" Desiree asked. 60 days after they processed the claim. Then we split it, 750 grand each. You can finally be with Art like you wanted, and I can retire to Florida. Everyone wins. Art Carver, the name from Bernie's text. His wife's lover, the insurance fraud specialist. "Should we call 911 now?" Desiree asked. "Pretend we just found them? Give it another 5 minutes. Make sure they're really gone." "I don't want any." A siren wailed in the distance, growing closer. "What the hell?" Wayne growled. "Who called them?" "I don't know. I didn't." "Doesn't matter. Stick to the story. We just knocked down the shed, didn't realize they were still inside. Play the devastated wife and grieving grandfather. Go." Their footsteps retreated as the sirens grew louder. Raoul heard voices, commotion, people running. "There's been a collapse." Desiree screamed, her voice perfectly pitched with false terror. "My husband, my baby, please." Raoul waited, counting seconds, making sure they were gone. Then he whispered, "Tommy, tell me what you heard them say." Every word. Tommy's small voice trembled. "Mom said, she said, Art will be so happy we pulled this off. And Grandpa Wayne said his life insurance was the easy part. Wait until we get his business accounts too." But there was more. Tommy's voice dropped even lower. "Dad, Mom said something else. She said, just like we did to Lauren." Raoul froze. Lauren, his first wife, who died in a house fire 4 years before he met Desiree. The fire that had been ruled accidental, caused by faulty wiring in a house that Wayne Parker had recently rewired as a favor. The pieces fell into a horrifying place. "Tommy," Raoul whispered, his voice shaking with cold fury. "We're going to play dead a little longer. When the paramedics come, when they start moving the debris, you stay limp. Let them think you're hurt worse than you are." "Can you do that?" "Yes, Dad. Good boy. We're going to survive this." And then, Raoul's jaw clenched. "We're going to make sure they never hurt anyone again." The debris began to shift as rescue workers arrived. The hospital room was sterile and cold. Raoul lay in the bed, his ribs wrapped, stitches mapping his scalp, his left arm in a sling. Tommy slept in a cot beside him, miraculously with only minor cuts and bruises, protected by his father's body. Desiree sat in the chair by the window, her face a perfect mask of concern. She'd been crying for the cameras, for the nurses, for anyone watching. But when she thought Raoul was unconscious, her fingers flew across her phone screen, texting rapidly. Raoul watched through slitted eyes. A knock at the door. Bernard Hancock entered, looking every inch the concerned family friend. To anyone else, he was just checking on Raoul. But the folder tucked under his arm told a different story. "How is he?" Desiree asked, her voice catching convincingly. "Stable. You should go get some coffee, Desiree. Rest. You've been here for hours." "I can't leave him." "I'll stay. Go on." She hesitated, then nodded. The moment the door closed behind her, Raoul's eyes snapped open. "She bought it?" Bernie asked quietly. "Hook, line, and sinker." Raoul winced as he sat up. "What did you find?" Bernie opened the folder. "Desiree Gilmore, née Parker. What I found goes deeper than we thought." He pulled out a photograph. "Recognize her?" It was Desiree, but younger, with darker hair and a different name on an old driver's license. "Danielle Perry?" "She's been Desiree for 7 years, since right before she met you. Before that, she was Danielle, married to a man named Clinton Freeman in Ohio. He died in a boating accident. She collected $200,000 in life insurance." Raoul's blood ran cold. Before that, Bernie continued, she was Donna Phillips in Michigan. Her husband, Lee Kent, died in a hunting accident. Another $200,000. Jesus Christ. Wayne Parker? He's been arrested 4 times for insurance fraud, convicted twice. Did 10 years total. And here's where it gets interesting. Bernie pulled out another document. "Lauren Joseph, your first wife, her death wasn't an accident. The fire inspector's report was altered. I found the original in archived files. Someone paid off the inspector. The wiring was deliberately sabotaged." Raoul's hands clenched into fists, pain shooting through his injured ribs. "Wayne, almost certainly. And guess who was living 2 towns over at the time? Danielle Perry, fresh off her second husband's death. They're a team, father and daughter. More than that." Bernie's expression darkened. "I ran DNA comparisons from public records and old court cases. Wayne Parker isn't just Desiree's father. Based on arrest records and age differences, he's likely her grandfather. Her real father, Wayne's son, died in prison 15 years ago. Armed robbery gone wrong. So this is a family business. Literally, they've been doing this for at least 15 years. Find a target, usually a successful man with good insurance. She marries him. They wait a year or 2, stage an accident, collect the money, and move on. You're number 4 that I can't confirm. There might be more." Raoul looked at his sleeping son. "Tommy heard her mention Lauren. She knows I'm starting to figure it out, which means they'll accelerate their timeline. If you miraculously survive this accident, they'll try again. Soon. Let them." Raoul's voice was steel. "How much time do I have before they expect me to wake up?" "Doctor said 24 to 48 hours before you'd be lucid enough to give statements. You've got maybe 12 hours before she gets suspicious. Then we work fast." Raoul swung his legs out of bed, ignoring the pain. "I need you to do 3 things. First, file all this with the insurance company, anonymously. Tank any chance of them collecting. Done. Second, I need you to track down Art Carver. Find out everything. Where he lives, his routines, his connection to Desiree. Already on it. He's been staying at the Riverside Motel under a fake name. Waiting for his cut. Perfect. Third." Raoul's eyes were cold and calculating. "I need you to help me die." Bernie raised an eyebrow. "Explain. They want me dead? Fine. Let's give them what they want. But on my terms." 20 hours later, Raoul Gilmore was officially pronounced dead. A sudden pulmonary embolism, the doctor told the grieving widow. A blood clot from the trauma had traveled to his lungs. Despite their best efforts, they couldn't save him. Desiree wept convincingly in the hospital corridor. Wayne stood beside her, hand on her shoulder, playing the devastated grandfather. Tommy, coached carefully by his father, sat in shock, silent and pale. What they didn't know was that the doctor, Dr. Philip Dennis, an old friend of Bernie's from medical school, had falsified everything. Raoul was very much alive, hidden in a private room in the hospital's administrative wing, recovering and planning. "The death certificate will pass any initial scrutiny," Dr. Dennis explained. "But it won't hold up to a full investigation, so you've got maybe a week before someone realizes something's off." "A week is all I need," Raoul said. He looked at Bernie. "Did you place the surveillance?" "Every room in your house is wired. Audio and video. Also put trackers on both their vehicles and their phones. Art Carver's room at the motel is covered too. And Tommy, safe with my wife at our place. Armed security, just in case. He's scared, but he's tough. Wants to help his dad." Raoul's jaw tightened. He's already helped more than he should have to. "This ends now." Over the next 3 days, Raul and Bernie watched everything unfold from a surveillance van parked near the house. They recorded every conversation, every damning word. Desiree and Wayne celebrated with champagne. Art Carver showed up the night after the funeral, and Raul had to watch his wife embrace another man in the house he'd built in the bed they'd shared. The business accounts, Art said, reviewing documents spread across the kitchen table. He had almost 300 grand in the company accounts. Once you're established as the widow and executor, we can drain it all before anyone notices. What about the kid? Wayne asked. He's seen too much. He's smart like his father. Accidents happen, Desiree said coldly. Grieving child, sleepwalking, tragic fall down the stairs. Everyone will understand. Raul's hand crushed the coffee cup he was holding. Bernie grabbed his shoulder. Wait, we need everything on record. Don't give them any way out. How long have you been doing this? Art asked, curious. You two are professionals. Wayne laughed. Started with Desiree's mother. Actually, my daughter. I taught her everything. How to pick targets, how to stage accidents, how to play the grieving widow. She married 4 men before she got careless. Drove drunk, died in a crash. Ironic. So Desiree learned from the best, Art said. How many has she done? 7 now, Desiree said casually. Raul was lucky number 7, each one easier than the last. 7. 3 more than Bernie had found. 7 families destroyed. 7 men murdered. And they'd almost made his son number 8. We've got them, Bernie said quietly. This is enough to... It's not enough, Raul interrupted. Evidence can be dismissed. Lawyers can create doubt. They can claim the recordings were fabricated. I need a confession they can't deny. I need witnesses. What are you thinking? Raul's smile was dangerous. They want to drain my business accounts? Let's make sure they do it in front of a lot of very interested people. Raul's construction company office was a modest building on the edge of town. On Friday afternoon, it was the site of an emergency board meeting. Desiree arrived dressed in morning black, playing the widow taking on her late husband's responsibilities. She didn't know that the board meeting had been carefully orchestrated. The attendees included Bernard Hancock as company accountant, 2 FBI agents posing as business partners, a police detective in plain clothes, and the county prosecutor pretending to be the company attorney. Mrs. Gilmore, Bernie began formally. We're here to discuss the transition of business assets and financial responsibilities. Of course, Desiree said, her voice trembling. Raul would want the business to continue. He built this with his own hands. In the surveillance van outside, Raul watched on a monitor, his jaw clenched. Beside him, Detective Omar Burton spoke into his radio. All units in position. Wait for my signal. Inside, Bernie slid papers across the table. We'll need your signature here to access the primary accounts. With Mr. Gilmore's death, you're the designated beneficiary. Desiree signed without hesitation. Then her phone buzzed. A text from Art. Wayne's got a problem. Need you at the motel. Now. She stood abruptly. I'm sorry, I need to handle something. Can we finish this Monday? Actually, one of the FBI agents said, his voice hardening, I think we'll finish this now. Desiree's eyes widened as they all rose simultaneously, revealing badges and weapons. Mrs. Gilmore, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and... She bolted, straight out the back door into the parking lot, where Raul Gilmore stood waiting. Desiree stopped dead, her face draining of color. You're dead. I saw you die. You saw what I wanted you to see. Raul's voice was cold. Congratulations, Desiree. Or should I call you Danielle? Or Donna? Hard to keep track of all your identities. Her shock transformed into rage. You son of a bitch. You ruined everything. No. You ruined everything the moment you tried to kill my son. Police vehicles screeched into the parking lot, surrounding them. But Raul kept his eyes locked on his wife. I know about Lauren. I know about Clinton Freeman, Lee Kent, and all the others. I know Wayne helped you stage their deaths. I know about Art Carver. I know everything. You can't prove anything, she spat. Actually, Detective Burton said, stepping forward with handcuffs, he can. We have 3 days of recorded conversations, including your confession to 7 murders. We have documentation of insurance fraud going back 18 years. And we have dozens of witnesses to your attempted theft today. As they cuffed her, Desiree's mask finally cracked. Where's my father? Wayne and Art are being arrested at the motel as we speak, Raoul said. Apparently Wayne was bragging to Art about how many people you two had killed together. Very descriptive. All recorded. You bastard. You won't get away with this. We have lawyers, we have. You have nothing, Raoul interrupted. Your life insurance policy on me? Voided due to fraud. My business accounts? Frozen pending investigation. Your co-conspirators? Turning on you to save themselves. You're done, Desiree. You're finally done. The county jail's interrogation rooms were designed to be uncomfortable. Wayne Parker sat in one, his weathered face finally showing his 73 years. Art Carver occupied another. His slick confidence evaporated now that he understood the weight of evidence against him. Raoul watched through one-way glass as Detective Burton worked Wayne over. Here's how this plays out, Burton said, spreading crime scene photos across the table. Lauren Joseph's burned house, the collapsed shed, other accident scenes from over the years. We have you on 7 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and about a dozen other charges that'll keep you in prison until you die. Wayne said nothing, his jaw set. Or, Burton continued, you cooperate fully. Tell us everything. Every victim, every detail, every person involved. The DA might take the death penalty off the table. Death penalty? Wayne's voice cracked. I'm an old man. You're a serial killer. You taught your granddaughter to seduce men and murder them for profit. You've been doing this for 2 decades. You really think Pennsylvania won't execute you for that? Through the glass, Raoul watched Wayne's resolve crumble. The old man who'd laughed as a shed collapsed on a 7-year-old child was just a frightened criminal facing justice. I want immunity, Wayne said. You get reduced charges. That's all. Talk or don't. Either way, you're never seeing the outside of a prison again. Wayne slumped. There were 11. 11 men over 20 years. Raoul's hands clenched. 11. Not 7. 11 families destroyed. My daughter, Desiree's mother, she started it. Found rich men, married them, staged accidents. Made almost $1 million before she got sloppy. After she died, Desiree wanted to continue. She was good at it. Better than her mother. And you helped, Burton pressed. I did the technical work. Sabotage brakes, cut electrical wires, weakened structures. Made everything look accidental. Wayne's voice was hollow. Desiree picked targets who had good insurance, no close family, businesses she could liquidate. Raoul Gilmore was supposed to be the last one. She wanted to retire after him. Why did it take 7 years with Raoul? Wayne actually laughed bitterly. Because he's smart, observant, military trained. We had to be careful, build up the insurance gradually, establish the troubled shed narrative over months. We couldn't rush it like the others. And his first wife, Lauren Joseph, that was our mistake, Wayne admitted. We didn't know Raoul and Lauren knew each other. When Desiree targeted Raoul years later, she didn't realize she was creating a pattern someone might eventually notice. Raoul had heard enough. He left the observation room and walked down the corridor to where Desiree was being held. He needed to see her one more time. She sat alone at the metal table, still in her black dress, mascara streaked down her face. When Raoul entered, her expression cycled through shock, anger, and finally, nothing. Empty resignation. Come to gloat, she asked. No, I came to understand. Raoul sat across from her. Why? Why me? Why Tommy? We gave you everything. Desiree laughed, a hollow sound. Because you had everything. That's how this works. Find someone successful, someone with assets, someone trusting. You were perfect. A business owner, decorated veteran, good insurance, and stupid enough to fall in love. And Tommy, collateral damage. He would have been a loose end eventually. The casual cruelty in her voice, talking about murdering their son like it was a business decision, made Raoul's blood run cold. Did you ever love me? Any of us? Any of them? Love. Desiree shook her head. Love is a transaction. You provided security, resources, legitimacy. I provided companionship and sex. When the return on investment decreased, it was time to close the deal and move on. That's all it ever was. You're a monster. I'm a survivor, she corrected. My mother taught me the world is full of marks waiting to be played. Wayne taught me how to play them. I did what I was raised to do. You had choices. So did you. You chose to play the hero, faking your death, setting up this elaborate trap. Congratulations, Raoul. You won. Her smile was poison. But you'll never be the same. Every time you close your eyes, you'll see that shed coming down. You'll wonder if Tommy really recovered or if he'll have nightmares forever. You'll question every relationship, every connection. I may go to prison, but I'll still own a piece of your mind forever. Raoul stood. No, you won't. Because unlike you, I know what love actually is. Tommy and I survived because we protected each other. That's something you'll never understand. And that's why you lost. He walked out without looking back. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Recordings, financial records, forensic evidence from multiple crime scenes, and testimony from Bernie Hancock, Detective Burton, and Raoul himself. Art Carver took a plea deal, testifying against both Wayne and Desiree in exchange for 25 years instead of life. His testimony detailed the insurance fraud operation, the fake identities, the money laundering. Wayne Parker, faced with the death penalty, cooperated fully. He provided details on all 11 murders, described his techniques, even drew diagrams of how he'd sabotaged various structures and vehicles. The prosecution granted him life without parole instead of execution. Desiree Gilmore, née Parker, refused any deal. She maintained her innocence, claimed the recordings were fake, insisted Raoul had staged everything out of vindictive rage over a failing marriage. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Raoul sat in the courtroom as the judge delivered the sentence. 11 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. Desiree would die in prison, just like the 11 men she'd killed. As they led her away in chains, she looked at Raoul one final time. Her expression held no remorse, no regret, just cold calculation, even in defeat. But Raoul felt nothing. She was already erased from his heart. 6 months later, Raoul stood in front of a new construction project, a community center being built in Lauren Joseph's memory. The money recovered from Desiree's accounts, combined with donations from several of the other victims' families Bernie had tracked down, funded it. Tommy, now 7.5, wore a small hard hat and carried a level, helping measure foundation corners. The nightmares had decreased. Therapy helped. But more than anything, knowing his father had protected him and brought their attackers to justice helped him heal. Dad, Tommy called out. Is this right? Raoul checked the level. Perfect, buddy. You're a natural. Bernie walked over, carrying 2 cups of coffee. You hear about Desiree? Tried to appeal. Court rejected it. Good. Raoul watched his son work. Any word on the other families? Found 3 more. Relatives of the men she killed. They're grateful to know the truth, even if it came too late. They're thinking about a civil suit to recover whatever assets she has left. Help them however you can. Always. Bernie paused. You doing okay? Really? Raoul considered the question. Was he okay? He'd been betrayed by someone he trusted, nearly murdered along with his son, forced to fake his own death, and spent months in court reliving the worst moments of his life. But he looked at Tommy, healthy and safe, working on a project that would honor Lauren's memory and help the community. He thought about the other families getting closure, justice, and perhaps some peace. He thought about how close they'd come to disaster and how they'd survived through courage and careful planning. I'm getting there, Raoul said honestly. Some days are harder than others, but we're still here. We survived, and we made sure they can never hurt anyone else. That's a hell of a victory. It is. Raoul smiled slightly. Tommy told me yesterday he wants to be a builder like me when he grows up, not because of what I build with my hands, but because of what I rebuilt after everything fell apart. Smart kid. He is. Takes after his old man. They stood in companionable silence, watching the construction crew work. In the distance, Raoul could hear children playing in the park adjacent to the site. Life continuing. Moving forward. His phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Dennis. Annual checkup this week? Want to make sure you're staying healthy, for real this time. Raoul smiled and texted back, "Absolutely." "And Bernie's buying lunch after to celebrate another year alive." Bernie read over his shoulder, "I am. You are. Considerate payment for saving my life." "Fair enough." Tommy ran over, his small face bright with excitement. "Dad, Mr. Bernard, come see. We found something cool in the foundation." As they followed the boy, Raoul realized something important. Desiree had been wrong in that final conversation. She didn't own any piece of his mind. She'd tried to bury him, tried to destroy everything he'd built, tried to turn his life into another one of her profitable tragedies. But she'd failed, because she'd underestimated the one thing she'd never understood. Real love isn't a transaction. It's a foundation. And unlike the shed she'd collapsed, the foundation Raoul and Tommy shared was built to last. He'd won not through violence or revenge, but through intelligence, preparation, and the simple determination to protect what mattered most. The law had delivered justice. His son was safe. His life was his own again. And that was the greatest victory of all. Epilogue. 3 years later, the Gilmore Community Center opened its doors. It offered resources for domestic violence victims, fraud prevention education, and counseling services for trauma survivors. A plaque near the entrance listed Lauren Joseph's name first, followed by the names of the other 10 men who'd been murdered by the Parker family. Tommy, now 10, stood with his father at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. He'd grown tall and confident, the shadows of that terrible day fading but never forgotten. He wore a suit and stood straight-backed as his father addressed the crowd. "This center exists because evil tried to win and failed," Raoul said. "It exists because people stood together, demanded justice, and refused to let tragedy have the final word. Every life lost to greed and cruelty